Hi, this is Stacy Gonzalez with my Module 8 case study. First thing that I want to go over is what I know about the school. So I do know it's a large rural district, 16 schools over 800 miles. So it's a very, very large space of schools. There's only one superintendent, and they have this interesting way of full-time teachers serving as assistant superintendents in the building. So that's what we do know. There is shared administration and psychologists, social workers, nurses. It seems like there's minimal supervision of the staff, and there is a conflict occurring between a veteran general education teacher and a new sped teacher, which I'll go over when I go over what I know about the staff. What do I know about the student, Carl? He's a third grade student at one of the 16 schools. He does have an IEP for a behavior disorder, and he has a behavior intervention plan, which is based on some sort of like consequence and reward. His parents are divorced and have joint custody, and they seem a little bit of not overly involved in the school or the services for the student, and they seem to be parents who wait for the school just to give them direction and instruction. We do know that Carl has shown some aggressiveness towards others in front of the school staff. His psychological profile indicates that he has no problems with intellectual functioning. However, emotionally, his emotional problems are not severe enough to warrant full-time services. And he is in a general education classroom with an IEP. What do I know about the staff? The staff consists of a general education teacher, who's Miss Taylor, who's been there 10 years. And a new teacher named Miss Green, who's our special education teacher, who serves sort of as this full-time SPED liaison, and this is her first year. She replaced Miss Lewis, who was there for 25 years, and it appears that the staff liked Miss Lewis's way of handling SPED issues, and Miss Taylor seems unwilling to collaborate with Miss Green. Miss Green also has a little bit of pressure put on her from Miss Taylor, and the parents even comment on this Miss Lewis and her style being different. We know that there's a Miss Willis, who's a district special education coordinator, and the superintendent travels between all the buildings during the week. There's only one of him. What do I need to know? Well, I would really like to know Carl's testing scores across multiple domains. What testing did the psychologist do? What's the availability of psychologists, social workers, aides? Is there an availability of any other staff? What specifically is outlined in his current behavioral intervention plan? So what does that look like? Also, what is this hierarchy of how it seems like there's a superintendent, these assistant superintendents, the special ed director they mentioned, the SPED teacher? Like, I'd like to know their roles and responsibilities. How are you an assistant superintendent yet work full-time? So I'd like to know that, what that looks like. I'd like to know the IEP process, Carl's IEP, his goals, his testing data, his report card data, Miss Taylor's evaluation data, anything from her class, and the number of special education students and general education students specifically in Carl's class. So here's kind of the problem, the way I identified it, is that Carl's behavior in Miss Taylor's third grade general education class has been escalating. And he's shown aggression specifically towards Miss Taylor, more so than the peers. Since his testing does not indicate a need for a restrictive environment, the SPED teacher has been unsuccessful in trying to collaborate with Miss Taylor around coming up with a plan. Miss Taylor is pretty frustrated, and so Miss Green is going to set up a new IEP with the parents. And I think part of the problem, as a new SPED teacher taking on the role of overseeing probably the SPED processes in the building and having a full class load herself, I think Miss Green lacks the support needed to make informed and sound decisions when it comes to difficult cases. The plan of action that I would suggest overarching, I'm going to start with an overarching plan of action and then kind of go into specific, but overarching is what is the general education staff development when it comes to following IEPs, modifications versus accommodations, high leverage instructional practices for all students, the legalities, and then I'd also add in there some sort of virtual professional learning network with the other SPED teachers in the district, because if there's one at each building or something like that, so they have a chance, because this district is so large, to collaborate, because there just does not seem to be the support for Miss Green. So that could potentially be helpful. Quarterly or by monthly meetings with the SPED director. I think there needs to be possibly some consistent IEP practices, or at least knowing what those IEP practices are, and especially for Miss Green. And then I think it'd be beneficial for her to do an IEP audit, so pulling some IEPs and seeing what they look like. Specifically, in when it comes to Carl, she needs to come up with some recording method to assess his goal attainment as outlined in the IEP. So what data is needed to support his behavior and occurrences around the goals that are outlined in the IEP. Potentially a 30-minute meeting with Miss Taylor to focus on this data collection so that Miss Green can help Miss Taylor understand how the data informs if Carl is attaining his goals or not, along with maybe asking Miss Taylor to email the parent after Miss Green and Miss Taylor have that meeting to keep them informed and CCing Miss Green on that. I think Miss Green would need to follow up with the special education director and the superintendent, since she did have meetings with both of them, and continually reinforcing this idea of how to collect data. So potentially observing Miss Green's, Miss Taylor's class, Miss Green observing and helping collect some of that data. How are we going to help promote success of all students? There needs to be some sort of nomenclature to support the school's cultural expectations for all student success. So, when we talk about this people first language, how can Miss Green help the staff really understand what that means? Do they understand least restrictive environment as opposed to like, get this kid out? And then how do they understand differentiation and personalization? I think Miss Green and the assistant superintendent, who is that teacher leader in the building, if they could have weekly meetings, they could be a good team together to plan professional learning. Maybe they have time for all staff meetings. Maybe together they're doing some classroom observation and have this ability to analyze survey data or academic data to make plans for school improvement. I think Miss Green could probably benefit as a new teacher for some professional development outside, and help promote teacher agency by finding your high leverage classrooms and asking those teachers to open it up. And also maybe getting some survey data back from parents, staff, students might be helpful. As I was reading this, I guess the biggest word that came to me was empathy. I felt empathy for Carl, for Miss Green. I mean, she was asking really good, clarifying questions. She wasn't jumping to conclusions. She wasn't, like just reacting to Miss Taylor and trying to solve Miss Taylor's frustration. I felt the frustration of Miss Taylor. It is frustrating when you have a student that you can't help the other students. Miss Green really was patient. I felt empathy for Carl's parents. I mean, they're in a really difficult place, and being at that table and having their kids going through this and knowing that there's potentially they're part of it, that would be frustrating. I had value that at least the IEP process is being followed, and I do appreciate that Miss Taylor values the safety of other students and staff in the building. I think further investigation needs to be done around how do other teachers, staff, and students respond to students with disability. Again, going back to our last lesson in student first language. When we talked about the culture of a school, the legalities around students with IEPs. What are there sheltered classes? What is the actual school makeup look like? How many kids are in the school? Where are they at? What resources are there in terms of curriculum and instruction? And how many teachers modify and accommodate for students with IEPs? Do they know how to do it? Academic success, how do we enhance instruction for all? I think Ms. Green made a great move by calling in an IEP meeting instead of just jumping to a conclusion and doing something different. I think developing an intervention system, this can be expanded across, if you come up with some plan for intervention, this can be expanded so that all staff are aware of it. I think helping support Miss Green in her new position as a new teacher is really crucial. The SPED director did give her some advice, so maybe some helpful time for them to spend together, as I talked about, and helping her understand her role and authority in that building. And then, if possible, somehow setting up interventions for supports. Are there after-school groups for kids? Is there possibly lunch with the social worker or lunch with Miss Green, or another compassionate adult who can support students emotionally, potentially academically, so that success can be achieved and attained by all students. This idea of personal well-being, I mean, Miss Green did a great job. She spent time with Carl. She observed him. She talked with him. She called the special education director to come up with a new plan, and she didn't make any changes until she heard back from the parents and scheduled that new IEP meeting. So I think that was really important to ensure Carl's well-being was first and foremost. And finally, this idea of how do we enhance instructional capacity? When Miss Green was confronted by Miss Taylor, she asked a really good clarifying question where she said, so his behavior has changed from being self-abusive to being physically threatening to teachers and students? And the teacher responded, well, he's directed his anger only towards me. So I thought she did a good job of asking a really good clarifying question. She also sought advice from 2 district administrators to make sure she was making a sound decision. And she did not blame. She didn't make excuses. So that was also really a great way that she handled it to enhance the instructional capacity. She also took time to observe and meet with Carl individually. So she's looking for patterns of behavior or seeking different ways of solutions so that learning can occur for Carl. So I think she's got some pretty sound thoughts and taking her time in doing that. In the future, I think maybe not giving way or power to Miss Taylor. That's going to just take a little bit of coaching, like in the meeting when Miss Taylor just jumped right in and got in with the parents. That might take a little bit of time for Miss Green, but Miss Green definitely is doing her best, given being a brand new teacher and being in what seems to be a school that lacks some resources. Thank you.